According to Imperial records, the Storm Griffons are a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes and supposed successor of the ever-venerable Dark Angels. There's no record of which founding created these Sons of the Lion, but the consensus amongst the Inquisition is that the chapter was founded in mid-M35 at the height of the Novotera interregnum. Thrown into the fires of combat from the very beginning of their sigil to the throne, the Storm Griffons have faced against a myriad of mankind's foes. From the dark and claustrophobic walkways of floating space hulks to the wide-open expanses of tundra and Deathworld plains, the chapter has been hardened and tempered in the fires of conflict. The chapter is currently fleet-based after the events that led to the annihilation of the homeworld Niota IV in late M41. Grandmaster Hester Aerio ordered the Exterminatus of the planet after its fall to the forces of the archenemy, a final act of defiance against the invaders as the final outer bastion was overrun under the Horde's assault. The true events of that final day are locked inside the deepest vaults of the Inquisition's librariums and vaults. Classified as such, few may ever know the complete truth about what the chapter has become. Scarce reports of apparitions come and go with the now shattered chapter, quickly and thoroughly denied and hidden by the Ordo Malleus. Scores of ghostly blue Astartes fighting like men possessed, cutting through heretic, demon and Xenos alike in a blur of bolt and blade alongside their surviving brethren. No one is sure what compels the souls of the lost to fight on with their brothers, save for the Griffons themselves. What little is currently known about this nomadic fleet-based chapter is that they now patrol the western fringes of the Segmentum Tempestus, primarily fighting chaos incursions into real space, wherever that may be. The chapter has fought countless Xenos races and invasions, as well as the forces of the archenemy, from the airborne war of Warboss Zarknut's Ironspitter to the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan. However, their true expertise lies with the extermination of the forces of chaos, as well as being their most hated foe for the destruction they have wrought upon them. The Storm Griffons regularly fought with elements of the Imperial Crusades in the Segmentum, acting as both surgical tools and a nigh unbreakable anvil, bolstering the Imperial forces that fight around them, as well as striking into the heart of the enemy's war machine, cutting the legs from under them in one swift motion. Such is the flexibility of the chapter. As well as fighting alongside the Imperial crusading forces in the sector, they have worked with the Ordo Hereticus on many occasions due to their expertise and close relationship to the Inquisition. Now, they form a much more solitary existence, fighting with who they can trust to scour the taint of chaos from the galaxy. In a galaxy constantly plunged into the fires of invasion, war and corruption, few individuals can stand against the tide and stay standing. Amongst those individuals, they are the Adeptus Astartes. The Storm Griffons and their fallen brothers, along with countless other chapters, form the Imperium's first and last line of defense against the dark and the twisted. The origins of the Storm Griffons chapter began on the verdant plains and sprawling rainforests of Niota, a small agri-world within the isolated shield of the Trizaran Nebula. Located on the eastern fringe of the Segmentum Tempestus, it's a world covered in verdant rainforests, sprawling savanna and savage jagged mountaintops. Each of its 4 large continents is a home to countless species of unique flora and fauna, among which live the sparse inhabitants of the planet. First Imperial contact with the planet occurred during the height of the Great Crusade, forward elements of the vast Imperial dispersal entering the vast nebula to investigate suspiciously powerful psychic pulses emanating from one of the planets inside. An Imperial exploratory vessel was dispatched to the planet under the Imperial designation of the name Niota IV. Once arriving into the orbit of the planet, long-range scans and observation began by the crew on board. While many previous planets the crew had investigated were merely more than lifeless husks or tectonic hellscapes, Niota IV held something that caused the men and women aboard to work tirelessly: life. A few short months of further investigation showed a brilliant wealth of geological and zoological data, as well as bizarre geographic occurrences that threatened to fill up the primary storage librariums of the ship. A landing party was sent down as soon as the crew discovered the gathering of life signatures on one of the vast savannas that populated the planet's equator. The ship broke through the atmosphere at dawn and landed 20 kilometers away from the settlement, touching down in a dried-up lake basin in what was named by then as part of the Lotharian Belt. By the time the landing party, 40 men in all, had reached the settlement on foot, the ground was already flowing with the torrential rain caused by the ship's breach into the atmosphere. What they found stunned them to their core. Amongst the snaking ridges and breathtaking landscape lay a small, functioning town. Walls made of large tree trunks hammered into the ground, surrounded by the group of motley mud and thatch huts, a large wooden gate framed by a towering arch of marble. The scientific element of the party instantly rushed over to try and investigate how such a monument was even capable of being made by such a primitive society. They were stopped in their tracks by a powerful force, willfully barring them from getting any closer to the gate. Unnerved, the scientists quickly moved back to the safety of their armed escort as they began negotiations to enter. The standard imperial procedure was not something these native people were familiar with, but after an hour of trying to communicate to the guards, they eventually relented and swung open the gate. The landing party was never heard from again. The only sign of their passing was a massive shockwave of psychic residue that caused minor tremors on the planet below. It took the crew above days to finally uncover the truth about the shockwave. A powerful psychic signature had boarded the beetle-like landing craft that had brought the party to the planet's surface. It wandered throughout the ship for a long while before homing in the engineer room and the reactor above all. It would later be discovered that the signature was a lone man, a seer in the local dialect. Attracted to the powerful reactor, he attempted to break into it. Whether this was out of curiosity or because the seer wanted the power of the reactor for himself is unknown. The blast was indeed massive, leveling the town, the arch, and atomizing the seer in one split second. Amongst the scattered wreckage and blast crater of the beetle-like lander, wanderers and clans from across the continent started to congregate around the quote-unquote Great Skybug. A shanty was quickly set up, which by the time the Imperium had fully laid claim to the world became the capital city of Asmaren. Niota was destined to become an agri-world, the seer slowly but surely hunted down by the ghostly black ships of the Inquisition. Many chose to go willingly, becoming great forces to the Imperium. Others resented these invaders and stood their ground, gargantuan stone cairns and gouging scars in the landscape marking the places where they finally met their end. After the Horus Heresy, the planet was once again lost to the Imperium, so the only records that remain are those that were written by the population of the world. The legend goes that after they were left once again to their own devices, the seers came out of hiding and laid claim to the great swathes of the habitable land. Clans formed under each of the remaining seers, slowly turning into kingdoms and dynasties of their own regard. The Silurian citadel was created sometime in M31 by the greatest of the clans named Clan Aether. Each and every psyker on Niota can trace their heritage back to these powerful individuals and the rich history that they left in their wake. Niota wasn't given to the chapter as some bountiful gift or tribute by the Imperium of Man. The sprawling jewel that hung in the cold of the void was fought for with bloodshed, defiance and honor. After the chapter's creation in M35, they were thrust into the heart of the Novotera interregnum, the grave threat for which they had been founded to exterminate. With a fully manned but as of yet untested chapter now at their command, the militant generals of the Retaliation Force set the Storm Griffons out to rend the heart of the enemy's war machine. For the next 3 decades, the new blooded chapter was forged and tempered against all that the insurrectionists had to offer. Hard lessons were learned before the insurrection was brought to an end. Only a scarce fraction of the deployed Astartes were left standing when the final elements of the fleeing traitors were cut down. The final battle was a black day in the chapter's history, a mark of shame stained so early onto their name. At the foot of the Moria Bastion, Grandmaster Gavrin Astenu mustered 2 entire companies of the chapter and stormed the Aurora's Gate. His stubborn temperament and refusal to withdraw in the face of overwhelming odds ultimately led to his downfall and a great many deaths of his battle brothers against the wall guns of the citadel. He was cut down in what should have been the chapter's moment of glory. Astenu's helmet had already been locked solid and rendered inoperable by shrapnel from a nearby artillery shell as the Griffons stormed their way into the main bastion's concourse. Refusing his Huskarl's repeated requests that he remove himself from the battlefield, he tore off his helmet and brandished his blade, declaring that the Griffons would be victorious as one. or not at all. The torrent of fire was wicked, a showering crossfire of hard rounds, las bolts, and the whistling crump of heavy artillery raining down among the attackers. 100 Astartes lay dead on the concourse before Astanu was also hit. A large hard round tore through the side of the Grandmaster's head, tearing flesh and bone away and blowing him to the ground. The Griffons faltered, not sure whether to continue their Grandmaster's final order into the blistering fire of the bastion or to withdraw out of the crossfire. A booming voice broke the silence, the beginning of a chant. "Never break, never falter." The voice came from Chandra Guptera, commander of the Grandmaster's Huskarls, brandishing Astenu's blackened blade and blowing apart the gun team that laid his master low. As he chanted, the Astartes around him surged onwards, a newfound fury in their blood, as they bellowed the answer to Guptera's call. The defenders scattered in a rout, Huskarls leading the charge and breaking through into the main spire within the hour. 300 Astartes lay dead at the end of the grueling campaign. Many hard lessons had been learned through the tenacity of their foe. Lessons that would never be forgotten. The world fell that day. The insurrection stamped out as the bulk of the Imperial advance relieved the battered attackers. Gabriel Astanu was relieved of his title as Grand Master and interred into a wholly condemned dreadnought sarcophagus before his superhuman biology succumbed to his grievous wounds. Armor-painted jet black in mourning and shame, the aquila of every dead Astartes was forged into a gargantuan power blade, the symbol of his penance that Astanu alone would carry. It was not the inner circle of the Griffons that deemed this punishment for their fallen master. Astanu's final moments in the gates of the hive were ones of rage and shame, closing his one remaining eye and praying to the God Emperor, a litany and prayer that he may be allowed another chance to repent. After the campaign drew to a close, the chapter journeyed to their homeworld. In their absence, the mechadendrites of the Adeptus Mechanicus had toiled relentlessly to turn the Silurian citadel into a fortress monastery worthy of the Adeptus Astartes. For the next 6 millennia, the chapter served with distinction in countless wars against countless foes, whether it was defending evacuation ships against Hive-Fleet Leviathan or exterminating a band of Tau Ethereals in the contentious Damocles Gulf. The Storm Griffons had fought against every horror the galaxy could throw at them. They had emerged bloodied, but victorious. However, their most dire battle was far closer to home and would bear more of a toll than anyone could have ever foreseen. As the first snow of 972 M41 began to fall upon the scarred surface of the planet, the siege of the chapter's homeworld had reached its bloody peak. While the Emperor's children led the writhing masses of cultists against the indomitable walls of the Fortress Ministry, another attack was poised towards the very heart of the planet, located far beneath the Earth. Deep below the scorched earth and savage fighting on the planet's surface, a completely different war was being fought. Amongst the ancient stone-built cathedrals and sprawling cave systems of the Valerian Ridge, the Storm Griffons fought tooth and nail to defend the Moria Gate. Named after the final hive in their blooding campaign, this vast rolling blast door separated the external caves and the lowest levels of the Fortress Ministry. In the tunnel, fighters were to break into the lower levels. They would likely cause havoc among the engineer rooms as well as encircling the surviving defenders. Nicknamed Rats by chapter champion Arome Apophyta, these well-trained and fanatical arch-enemy soldiers were putting up stiff resistance even for the Adeptus Astartes. Melter charges rigged as crude booby traps along with other dishonorable and underhand techniques allowed them to cut off and slowly wear down the remaining defenders. Amongst the defenders of the gate was the entirety of the Storm Griffons' Third Company, led by Master Bastek Qatar, along with chapter champion Arome Apophyta and several battalions of the Niotan PDF. The battle lasted for almost 2 years, spreading through hundreds of kilometers of water-cut and man-made caverns sprawling under Asmaren and the Turanian plains. Even before the vast counterattack that pushed the chapter back to the gates of the monastery, the caves were filled with traps and ambushes, supported by other elements that posed a far greater threat to the Third and the battle as a whole. While the land war raged above and the Emperor's children threw themselves against the curtain walls, the 8th Legion skulked through the dark. using their mortal fodder to draw out the loyalist Astartes, as well as being led by their commander, Quarren the Dissonant. The third was slowly and surely picked off along with the mortal defenders. The screams and begging of the captured Imperial troops echoed for miles in the enclosed caves, spreading abject terror through their ranks. Only by the leadership and rallying force of the Third Company did the mortals keep true to their faith and the defense of the gate. By the time the archenemy was pushed back beyond the Graven Mountains, the Third Company sallied forth into the sprawl to clear out the passages of stragglers. Split into small 5-man kill teams, the Astartes caved in exits to the world above, along with burning out pockets of fanatical resistance with bolt and Promethean flame. While the mortals fled in terror from the advance of the Imperials, Quarren and his warriors stayed in the caverns. 118 warriors strong, the scattered remnants of the long-corrupted 22nd and 23rd Companies formed into crude hunting packs in the caverns below, coming together to form a warband named the Hollow Eyes. Such is the nature of the 8th Legion. Many squads broke rank with their master's blessing and ascended to the city above. They evaded the defenders and caused bloody havoc amongst the civilian population and military alike, while the main archenemy assault fell back and tried to regroup to the south. After the main force returned into the mountains, the hit-and-run raids continued from the air. For a time, the Third Company had time to rest. Clearing out the scant and pathetic resistance in the outer chambers only took a few more days. However, the archenemy had already regrouped after their probing assaults, and barely 2 weeks later, the main invasion began. Having been bled to almost half their number by the constant attrition, the loss of countless brothers' gene seed and sacred armor to the vulture-like Night Lords had taken their toll against the defenders. Vast defensive bulwarks were created in the tunnels. If the enemy wanted to take their home, they would pay for every step in blood. After the sprawling labyrinth of firing pits, walls and trenches were completed in the cathedral-like caverns, they waited for the inevitable assault. Even the bristling defenses couldn't hope to repel what came next. Waves of screaming bodies came through the tunnels like a flood, in a few hours breaking the first line of defenses by sheer weight of numbers. Stalk tanks and rockets took care of the remaining PDF gun positions in showering mushrooms of fire as the Third Company was pushed back into the gargantuan chambers that made up the Circle of Heroes. The Circle of Heroes is regarded as a tale of Niotan folklore, a vast chamber beneath a Solarian citadel where the Knightly Order and Skyseers before them gathered in secret. It is no myth to those who have seen the truth. Entombment in a vast underground chamber the size of a strike cruiser, this legendary place lays buried far beneath the earth. Flora and fauna flourish in this place, a secret world gifted by the last remaining Skyseers as a place of peace and remembrance before their massacre by the Lost. Each Grand Seer was buried in the center of the vast chamber, forming a circle where the inherent psychic ability was used to retain balance to the world and to repair the damage caused by their fallen brothers. Since that time of seers, knights and warriors of old, it has become the heart of Nyota. As the sun began to set on a dying world wreathed in flame, the Third Company made their stand. Assembled in the vast cathedral-like chamber, illuminated by lanterns and bioluminescent lichen, the warriors of the Third unleashed a legion's worth of righteous fury upon the invaders of their world. The Third never left their positions in the chamber. Master Bastic Qatar formed up his bloodied company amongst the Eola trees, standing stones and flowing underwater creeks that made up the chamber. Tarantula turrets and the remaining squads armed for long-range combat used the natural cover as well as hastily assembled palisades and firing platforms to ambush and outflank their foe, whilst the older and more stubborn veterans of the Third stood their ground with their captain. The final members of the Third scoured the subterranean landscape with cold burning rage in their hearts. A small amount of reinforcement managed to break through to the chambers amongst the booby traps and ambushes over the course of the battle, against all odds, providing much-needed fire support to the doomed company. Squad Ascalon of the Wraithwing was the first to break through the encirclement into the Caverns of Remembrance. As the 5 members of the first company broke through the enemy blockade into the circle chamber, one lone Astartes held the third company banner aloft. With a tattered standard in one hand and blazing bolter in the other, the lone battle brother fought like a man possessed. Barking storm bolters and the deafening cacophony of Brother Caldron's assault cannon added to the clamor of the fight as the first company broke through the last survivor. After a few brief moments of the murderous crossfire, the arch-enemy was slaughtered wholesale. While the flood of ragtag mortals was decimated, Quarren and his brothers managed to silently make their way through the Moria Gate and into the bowels of the Fortress Ministry. As the Third Company finally fell under the redoubled assault of the 8th Legion, the twins Aether defended the Holy Reliquary that lay at the very base of the monastery. By the time of the siege foes, Aether had elevated to the master of the veteran Sablewing 2nd Company, while his twin Ezra had taken the place of Chief Librarian Hecton Uriel. Uriel was slain while hunting one of the foul psychic beasts that arch-enemy had summoned to destroy the outer walls of Asmaren. Ezra, being elevated to the rank by name as the Chief Librarian, finally succumbed to the horrific damage the beast had wrought upon his body. Phoses and Ezra both fought alongside each other as well as the Sablewing throughout the siege of their homeworld. Countless deadly raids were launched deep into the enemy territory, causing havoc amongst the arch-enemy's lines. However, during the last-ditch defense of the Fortress Ministry's reliquary, Phoses was killed and harvested by the hand of Quarren. Ezra lost complete control of his gifts as his twin psychic scream ripped into his mind, his body becoming a conduit for massive amounts of raw warp energy as the final blockades were overrun. This uncontrollable conduit to the Immaterium pulled forth the souls of his fallen brothers back into the material realm as tendrils of raw psychic power ripped the very monastery apart. Sights of ghostly blue Astartes wreathed in warp fire and cutting swathes through ranks of terrified enemies have remained the thing of legend amongst the survivors of the battle, and only a scant few fully know the truth of what happened in those final moments of the world. In his final order, before being overrun by the twisted masses of the Emperor's children, Grandmaster Aero ordered the Exterminatus of Niota. Cyclonic torpedoes cracked the world apart, destroying the Chaos Incursion before they could escape. Those final seconds of their world, the Storm Griffons bellowed to the sky in victorious vindication. Every battle brother leapt into the fray to kill as many of the wretched invaders before the very ground they stood on ceased to exist. To the wider Imperium, this was the death of the chapter. The bell of lost souls chimed 1,000 times to mourn the loss of such loyal sons of the Imperium. Truly, no one could have survived the cracking of a planet in such an absolute fashion. The Skyseers of ancient times, however, were powerful entities indeed. The raw psychic currents of their tomb enabling a tiny chunk of the destroyed planet to harbor the surviving Astartes. Though they had fought off the extermination of their chapter and were thought dead by the wider Imperium, they had survived. As the sky blackened with invasion ships on the first day the chapter numbered 700, they now numbered barely 50. For the Griffons, there will always be times where ammunitions run dry. The numbers are stacked against them, and all hope seems lost. There is no lost hope or pessimism amongst the remainder of this bloodied but defiant chapter. Dry bolters are maglocked, and all manner of melee weapons from power swords to claws to simply bare fists are used to beat back the enemy. Led by now Grandmaster Ezra Aether, the Storm Griffons were rediscovered by the Inquisition over a century later, and reformed into a full-blooded chapter once more, the last remaining battle brothers forming the inner core as the first batches of Primaris were delivered to them, thus beginning the slow rebuild of the bloodied but unbroken chapter. Strength against strength, mind against mind, steel against steel. This is the Griffon's way of war, and a brutally effective one it is.